Alright, hey everyone. For the past 3 days I've been uploading an attack on Zos, part 1 through 3, and that was more of a introduction to what I'm going to do right now. The Sorc review for the patch notes from Imperial City all the way down to Murkmire. And now, that would be a lot, right, if I was to go through everything. So what I did, and just like a disclaimer, I removed stamp Sorc changes, or predominantly stamp Sorc changes. I removed the pet buffs and nerfs, and I also removed stuff like liquid lightning and random language changes in the text, or visual updates, or fixing bugs in a skill, essentially, just so I can condense it to the things that I want to focus on here, which is PvP changes primarily, and how it has impacted Sorc throughout the past 3 years, and how at the time it might have been a good change, or a decent change, and it made sense because of Sorc's strength compared to other classes, but because of the sets, the skills, the poisons, other class changes, etc., have come out in the 3 years since Imperial City, how it has changed the meta. It has changed the viability of some of the abilities that should be changed back or reverted or updated, because I feel like Sorc is an outdated class at this point, and I'm going to go over why. So first I'm going to start off with is I'm going to go through these patch notes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through, I'm going to kind of highlight things. Red is a nerf, green is a buff. So starting with Imperial City, we gained a little bit of stamina recovery, right? They know, like, from the beginning what you're going to see is that they continue to update and give us small buffs to our sustain through Dark Deal, through passives, etc., because they understand that Sorc has an issue with sustain. So then they do this, they reduce the cost of the ability, it grants minor mending, but they later remove that, so it's really irrelevant. Ball Lightning and Bolt Escape. This is the biggest first nerf from Imperial City. We have the increased cost. We no longer get the delay. I mean, we no longer have the delay removed. We now have delay on the front and back end, so now it's clunkier to use and it's slower. You can't use it like Ezra did back in the day, and they all have a clip above. And then they reduce the duration from the orbs to absorb projectiles down 4 seconds. And now, at the time, if we go over this, Sorc's mobility was insane, right? There was maybe Major Expedition on just bow. There was no accelerate, there wasn't swift, there weren't sets that gave Major Expedition, there wasn't an influx, or I don't even think there was a use of expedition pots. I don't think those were even out at the time. So when you think about it, Sorcs had insane mobility compared to every other class. They could spam streak like 10 times in a row, be gone if they wanted to, right? It was a great way to like draw out your enemies, to like get some to fuck off. But now if we flash forward 3 years, that's really not the case. Now we have accelerate, we've got swift, we've got sets, we've got gap closers and unique snares on them. We have just so many ways, and so we have a ton of people are spamming snares and cost poisons or something that make it even harder to use and less viable. But I'll get back to that later. So then here we go, energy overload. Increase the amount of magic returned to you by 300%. See, once again, they're trying to increase our sustain. Increase the damage. This morph can critically hit. It's a nice little damage buff. Surge. This is where they removed, but I believe they bring it back. This isn't the main nerf to Surge, but they reduce the cost and they increase the duration. That's another sustain buff, because if you don't have to put it up as much, and if it costs less, you're going to save yourself quite a deal. And then right here, increased stamina restored by this ability. So a bunch of sustain buffs in Imperial City, and then one hard-hitting nerf to our class-defining skill, I would say, a streak, and being able to just move on a whim. Orsinium, it was just bug fixes, visuals, and whatnot, so not really much to look at there. Thieves Guild. Crystal Blast, this is the first time we see an inkling of kind of what they wanted this skill to be an instant thieves guild. So if that gives us any, you know, hindsight's 2020 now. But if you look back, you're like, oh, they buffed this by 25% on the damage. They're probably alluding to they wanted people to use it. You know, so then later on in Clockwork, when they nerfed the stun, this is probably why. They wanted people to use the skill. People weren't using the skill because they, you know, buffed it by 25%. They buffed it by 25% later on in a future patch, and people still weren't using it. For whatever reason, they had a hard-on to have people use it. So then increase the cost of stability and it's more, but they return even more. Once again, they're trying to give us more sustain on it. Minor intellect. And once again, we just keep getting sustain buffs. In here, they kind of tweaked with negate, and they made it work better, doing damage and stunning, and you know, if you're standing in it, you get heals, etc., etc. And they increased the sustain that we got again from Dark Exchange. It's the third in a row now where Dark Exchange has received a sustain buff. Right? Ward. This is the first big nerf to Sorcs on their defensive ability, and this was pretty huge at the time. I remember it happening, and I'm like, it's like your heart drops, right? You're like, wow, 20 seconds to 6, that's a huge change. And this is also a sustained nerf, because now you're casting your wards more, you don't have them up as long, and the issue with this is your offensive window comes down a lot. In the sense, it is an issue for us, because, right, you want to have your ward up as much as possible, but it does help separate the rookie or the beginner Sorcs from people who are skilled and good at maintaining their bar weaving. And then it also allows enemies to have an opening, right? A little bit easier. So they, you know, I understand it. I'll take it. This is a decent, you know, nerf. You know, looking back 2 years, I can understand. I can agree with this. This is a good nerf. Maybe 8 seconds, but 6 is fine. We still have plenty of time to cast our stuff. It's just the sustain is the major issue coming of this. Right, Mage's Fury. I left this on because I thought this was really interesting. Although it really didn't, you know, fit into something where a category that I really cared about. But so Mage's Fury will now be more responsive when proccing their execute damage. And its morphs will now proc execute damage explosion at 20%, not when they're only below. And then they fix visual improvements and bugs or whatever. And the reason I left this here was because it now in Somerset and going future and Wolf Hunter, Furies had quite a bit of issues with proccing on people. There was an issue where you would cast it and the ability itself that marks the debuff on an opponent would have a chance to miss. And then when the proc itself would explode because they reached execute range, that could also miss. So you'd have 2 chances to miss. And it was just very unreliable. So the person would be below 20%. You use your execute, it missed. It would just straight up miss. And you do it again, it misses. Which results in like a lot of missed kills. Especially since Sorc has to put so much into like chunking someone down, right? Because you're telegraphed on a 3.5 second delayed burst. Your curse, your weaves, and then your frag. And then if your Fury doesn't go off, you have to reset. You have to start over and, you know, rinse, repeat the whole ward cycle, and that's a huge hit on your sustain ability. Surge, this ability now, this is right here in Dark Brotherhood. This is like, I believe it was Dark Brotherhood or Shadows of the Hist. It was around this time that Surge got nerfed. We get a flat value of health back, so like the 2,000 something whenever we crit. We used to get a percentage of the crit. So if I hit for a crit for 10k, I would get a percentage of that. So I think it, you know, 30% or 50%, I would get that flat value of a heal, and there was no cap to it. So if I had Boundless up and I crit with that, while I also crit with my frag, I could get a heal from both. And now it's capped to 1 second for one skill, but it's also capped at 2k, and then that's really not that much healing, especially with, you know, Defile, the increase of damage and CP. Like, So at the time we had 501 CP, 531 potentially. A 2000 heal is decent, right? There's people really don't have access to Defile at this point. Fasalas was like the main set, and no one was really running Fasalas. The only person who started running it was a little bit before 1 tam, and that was Dubzug. But this now, 2 years later, is a lot weaker, right? It's 1 second to proc, especially for a Mag Sorc. Stamp Sorc has it a little bit better, you know, because they have running dots and hots. So with this weaved in, it's just an extra nice sustainability heal. But for Sorc, how do we proc this? Boundless? Alright, so we have to fit that on our bar. We put it on our overload bar, sure, that works. But now if we put on overload, does that mean we're not running Resto or Undo or a utility negate alt or Atro on our back bar? Or do we drop our Dawnbreaker or Meteor or Soul Assault or something like that on the front bar? Or do we just straight up drop Harness for it, and that's a sustained hit to us, like in combat? Those are decisions that we have to make, and when we try and put this Boundless on to help proc Surge, because it doesn't proc off of dots like burning or poison, like poison dots for us. This actually it might proc off that, but this Surge heal. So now that we have all this Defile, we have all this damage coming in with 300 plus CP, the 2000 is really not enough, and we can't really proc it effectively because now that we have 6-second wards, we're constantly swapping back and forth between bars, and there are great lapses in when we can do damage. So when we do damage, we're probably offensive, we probably didn't need a heal. We were probably 70% up with a ward on, and we were going for a combo. That Power Surge really isn't going to allow us to do much. The only time that this Power Surge is going to be effective is if we didn't want to cast a Healing Word, which is quite expensive for us, and we wanted to stay offensive. So if we have like 40 to 60% health, and we have Power Surge up, we go offensive with a ward on, and we get that health back incrementally through Surge, Light Attack, Weave, Frag, and hope that something crits to give us that heal. But it's very off and on and wishy-washy because we have to be offensive. And when you're a Sorc, and the moment you get outnumbered, your offensive gaps greatly reduce. Your windows in the time that you can spend going offensive for a curse explosion every 3.5 seconds gets really, really small. You have to like put a curse on someone, swap back to your back bar, put a ward up, roll or swap back, and try and line up a combo with that curse while you're getting 2v1 or 3v1, and it can be difficult. And you know, I guess that is the skill that comes in place, and I'm not saying we don't want skill, we don't want it to be easy mode, but they should look at a rework of this skill now in the future because of the changes that went through in the next 2 years after this nerf. And I'll go over alternatives and why I think that more later on. But then we'll also lose Streak stunning through block. I believe it was once again between DB and Shadows the Hist. I remember being able to drop a meteor and streak through people and drop their block, make them take the meteor, and I put this on here and I wanted to highlight it a little bit more because a 1.5 years later they nerfed the stun on frag and they put out Rune Cage, and one of their developer comments or notes was that they wanted us to have a way to stun people through block. They wanted us to counter people who are rolling, you know, etc. Streak is a skill. In my opinion, Streak is a skill for that. It means that we can't be gods like airstrikes from afar, right, with the up to 41 meter range Rune Gauge through anything at the time. We now have to be within 5 to 8 meters to streak on them. And this allows counterplay. People can stun us before we streak. They can predict our streak. They can do something to, you know, interact and dodge our streak. But if we really wanted that streak stunned through block or roll, which is a great way, in my opinion, to introduce strategic and also interactive gameplay, is that because we have to be up close, right? We're a ranged class, but because we want that streak through stun or block for our meteor or curse combo or whatever, we're gonna go up close and we're gonna streak them. If we want our stun from the range, frag was a great way to do that because you'd proc your frag, 20 some meters, you toss the frag with your combo, and they have plenty of time from your casting position to them to see the frag coming, to see the purple hands glowing, to understand that frag does stun, and they can reflect it, they can roll it, they can block it, etc. If that's not working on our enemies, we move up close, and then we streak them. We, drop their block for a meteor combo, we drop their block with a curse procking, we turn around, toss a frag while on the ground quick, etc. And I feel like that would introduce so much more like mind game play. And one of the big things that I enjoyed on Sorc dueling, and even Sorc v Sorc especially, was that when frag stunned, the fights were dynamic. They were intense, they were fast paced, and some of my favorite duels were versus people like Micah or Fosso, other Sorcs. Those fights were intense, and you could see us like strutting around, like between blocking, knowing that we had a block that frag stun, or else we would get killed and bursted. You could see us moving into a position where we are close, so we could drop our DB stuns with animation canceling, or toss a frag out sneakily between curses, or etc, etc. That was fun. Now it's just sit back, rinse, repeat, getting your meteor, drop rune cage. And now that they got a rune cage, we can't even really do that. But I feel like if they wanted that, spectrum of stun capability through block and roll, streak is a good skill for that. But coming back to that later, I'm gonna speed this up a little bit. So one tam, Danger Curse, it was a buff. Can no longer be blocked, and the damage will go off in the AoE. And it can still be blocked, etc, etc. They did an update to it later on in Homestead, I believe. Yeah, it will still deal the damage even if the person dies. Good changes to Curse, because they did remove Thaumaturge buffing it in DBH, which meant you can no longer do inevitable debt Curse combos as effectively with dual wield. So in case here, they reduce the cost. I never thought this was a good change. I always was like, why would you do that? Because slightly before this patch, we had an issue with Bombard. People were spamming that skill so much that it was completely annoying. There really wasn't much snare removal, or people didn't really use forward momentum at the time, and that was like a player issue. But you'd just be permanently rooted, especially if you're a Magicka class. People would just spam Bombard, and now they're just doing it with Encase because it's reduced cost. I thought that Encase should get the Bombard treatment, where there's a delay, like a downtime between when you can Encase. So then summon Storm Atro, a nice little buff, really doesn't mean much, but increase the damage is good for duels, but people still hate it in duels, so it's kind of like a double-edged blade. They renamed Curse at this point, and they give us an Echo. At first, and I still don't like this change, because for me, this just gives Sorcs more skills to hate on, right? You'll see Nightblades complaining that all they have to do is put their curse on me, and then they pull me out of cloak like 9 seconds later, etc, etc, even when I'm out. And I agree. I don't think that we should be able to put the curse on someone, have it proc the first time when we want to hit our burst rotation, and then wait another 6 seconds, or 8.5 seconds for another curse to proc. Because let's be real, in PvP, no one's gonna wait 9 seconds. Even if you're taking pressure, you're not gonna wait 9 seconds for it to explode again. If anything, it'll explode because you didn't have time to go on curse, and it'll just hit them in without you either being prepared, or you'll get lucky and you'll get a kill. But really, that it removes skill, and it's an awkward change. It really doesn't do much. It's mainly, in my opinion, this is mainly a PvE buff, right? You leave it up, you can slightly increase your DPS because you don't have to keep casting it every 3.5 seconds and being on that bar. So you let it sit, and then you do other abilities and weave. So for PvE, good, but for PvP, I'm not really a fan of it, because I feel like there could be different changes. It just brings more hate to the class and the curse in itself. And I think that the Echo is really a waste of a change, but that's just my opinion. So then here they wanted to free up some global cooldowns. And this is why I underlined this, and the main reason I left this in, once again, is because this is their note. They're allowing a sorcerer to free up some global cooldowns, right? Which I think is hilarious going into Murkmire, where they're giving us a cast time, which could initially be bashed. And I don't think they actually knew that this skill could be bashed when they put it out. I think that like just they missed that, like they forgot about it. It was like a brain fart. They were like, oh, let's get a cast time on this skill. That'd be good. Like interactive, allow people ways to counter wards, and so it's not mindless spamming. But then they didn't think that, you know, oh wait, you can bash castable skills. So after a week of people complaining and pointing it out and doing clips and whatnot, like, oh, okay, we're gonna remove the bash and give them a cast time. But putting a cast time on it does not free up our global cooldowns. It actually makes it harder. It makes it harder to weave things. It makes it harder to swap bars. It makes it harder to be in combat in PvE and PvP. And it doesn't help us maintain our burst potential. It honestly puts us on a shorter clock for when our ward's up and when it's down, and when we can go offensive and not. In my opinion, the major minor system to wards is the most optimal. You can't have harness and harden up at the same time. But I've always been under like the strong opinion that harness and harden getting stacked together is no different than me leaving hardened up and casting it again, right? So if I put on harness and hardened and I'm at a 20k ward, it looks daunting to people that don't understand the game, or they're new, or they haven't played the class, etc, etc. So when they see a 20k ward and then 20k health, they're like, holy, right? But when I put on a hardened ward 10k and I get hit and I just recast it, that's essentially me having that 20k ward. Whether or not it means I need to put it up 2 seconds later, 3 seconds later, and you're like, oh well, if you put up both wards ahead of time, you just free up your, the next 4 seconds. That might be the case, but in my opinion, it's a waste of magicka, because in most cases, the 20k damage is not going to be burned through, unless you're getting like 3v1 or like 5v1 or like extreme damage is coming in. I feel like you're better off just using Harden and casting it again when you need it. You save yourself magicka. Stamina's not removing your harness, which means you don't get the magicka back. There's always that risk of that happening. But that's an issue with wards, and why people have an issue with wards. They don't understand it. But major minor system would allow us to put harness and harden both on major and everything else on minor. And then we'd have to make the decision, do we want magicka back in a smaller ward? Can we afford to put up harness even if we have a stamina and a magicka class hitting us? Because the stamina guy could rip it off before the magicka guy even has a chance to proc the harness returned. And it would be a little more dynamic. Anyways, moving on. Real quick. Morrowind was a huge hit, not just to us, but to everybody. But in my opinion, while it was a hit to everybody's sustain, it was a harder sustain hit on us, because we lost 16, it was 16 I believe, not 15% cost reduction from CP. We lost up to 10% magicka recovery in CP, and you're like, okay, well, you're not going to put 100 points into it to get the full amount. Okay, but now at this point in the game where we have 200 more CP, I probably could, right? And I probably would. There's not many trees that you can put stuff into, so you're probably going to go for this cost reduction because it's really nice. But we lost that, and then light armor lost a percentage on cost reduction and lost 2% magic recovery. For a total of, I believe we lost up to, so it's 5% if you're running light armor, 5 pieces, up to 7% in the light armor tree of cost reduction, and then 16% in CP, for a total of like 23%. Ideally, probably just gonna be 15%, right? You're probably not gonna get the full 15 or the full 16 on CP, and you're probably not gonna get the full 7% in light armor, because you're probably gonna run heavy and medium and go 5-1-1 or a variant. Extreme builds could go 7 light if they're doing divines and fuse, etc, etc, but then they probably want the max magicka, so once again they're probably not going to. But that loss in sustain really made our skills skyrocket in magicka. Like Hardened Ward moved up like 500 plus. Harness is now costing us 4k. Mines now costing us 6k before our own cost reduction implemented with racials and whatever else we have in light armor, which brought it down to like 5 point something. You know, even our frag and our shock and our curse are going up. Our streak increase is going to be insane after we spam it a couple times. All of this adds up really hard on Sorc, mainly because we have to keep our wards up every 6 seconds, right? Whether or not we take that damage, that ward has to come back up when we're in combat within 5 to 6 seconds, because if there's a time that we drop that ward, we're always vulnerable to a burst. And most other people don't have a telegraphed delayed burst. It can be instant, right? A D-swing can get weaved in with a light and a Dawnbreaker and an execute all within 1 to 2 seconds from impact point, not cast time. So if that happens, we'll just get ripped to shreds. So when we have to keep casting that ward, it's a toll on our resource pool. Meaning this was the patch that Sorc's really had to spec more sustain. Before Morrowind, I was easily able to run Lich, BSW, One Piece Max Magicka, and a VMA Destro. I had really good damage. I had good survivability. I still had low stam recovery. I still felt I could burn out on Magicka in 1vx's or group play. But I felt like I had more versatility with my build options. And then Morrowind came around and I'm like, fuck. I need to run Shackle, Lich, or Amber Plasm, Lich. Actually, Shackle wasn't even out yet. I have to run Amber Plasm, Lich, etc, etc. Or was Shackle out? But anyways, it was like tough on us because this sustain nerf made it so we had to spec more to sustain with glyphs, Atra Mundus, 2 sets or 1.5 sets with a pseudo sustain, and it took a toll on our damage. Not only that, taking a toll on our damage, we got a Crystal Fragment damage nerf. You know, so now we have a Telegraph Burst. We got quite a bit of damage nerf with the sets that we can wear, and also frag. We have increased cost on everything, so now we have a even harder time, like a clock on us being able to kill people and not being able to kill people. Alright, so then let's go to the spoiler here. They said sustained damage in PvP and burst damage in PvP is currently too high, so reducing the damage bonus from Crystal Frags brings them down slightly in both areas without being too punishing to the overall damage kit. And I disagree with this. Like, the PvP burst was high, but you have to keep in mind that Shadow Mundus was also nerfed 3%. And I used to use Shadow Mundus. We lost quite a bit of damage because of the sets that we can wear. But even with like the Homestead build that I used to run, people would still survive, right? You know, anyone who's decent at the game would still survive against me. You know, Purify Curse, Reflector, Blocker, Roll Frags. You know, there's so many ways that people are able to counter Sorc's abilities that even though it was high, and the reason it is high is because they have to one-shot, right? Sorcs need to one-shot. You know, you can say, oh, everyone needs to one-shot to get a kill. What are you talking about? We have no good sustained pressure. It's like light attacks and weaves with shock between curse combos, right? Like we didn't really, and then if you tossed a frag off of your burst rotation, you would stun them and waste your stun, which meant they could probably just heal through your next incoming burst. You could argue that the damage was a little too high. It might have been on the higher spectrum, but I don't think that all of these things at once should have happened. Because we dropped our damage in an incredible amount. If you want to talk about it, you want to disagree, say in the comments below. I'll go ahead and I'll gladly talk about it. So then here, Dark Exchange added a blending animation. Just more time for us to get bashed, so in my opinion that's a little nerf. Couldn't weave it as well, and they talk about it there. And then I said I was leaving pets out, but I left them in for here because of the note that they had. So the amount of area of effect damage sorcerers currently put out is too high, so reducing the effectiveness of this ability will bring them more in line with other classes. And the issue I have with this is, like, at the time, that might have made sense, but now, it's like, bring them more in line with other classes. Why are we not still doing that? If anything, we need to be brought up to be in line with other classes. Stamden is insane with damage burst and mitigation and sustain. Nightblades are doing really well in PvE and PvP. You know, Templars have really good damage in PvP. They're not really as prevalent in PvE, a little bit, but you know, you don't see them much. But anyways, the amount of area effect damage that Sorc currently put out is like what? Liquid Lightning, Pat AoE, etc. But, and then, if you, the reason I underline this is if you look at Nightblade's Will, it hits for an insane amount. It goes minor berserk, minor endurance, cheap cost, easy to get up, it's flexible, it's smooth. And then you look at frag, and frag's hitting like a wet noodle, between 3k to 7k on the high end, in non-crit to crit. We're not really being brought in line, in my opinion, with our damage. Every patch we get a nerf to, from here on out we get a nerf to our damage, we get a nerf to our ability to lock people in for the damage. It's getting harder and harder. And so while these patch notes at the time might have been decent, you know, they could be justifiable, we go, you know, another year, another 2 years, and it's like, okay, well now we're really outdated. Not many things here, just a couple sets that we could use, you know, language changes to Surge. Alright, so then Clockwork City, we get another Shards morph damage buff, so another 25, so it's up 50% since Thieves. And they want this morph to work and be worth time, like the time spent casting, so they increase the damage, etc. And then they nerf frag. They take the stun off. And they wanted to separate the function of abilities into more distinct roles. Crystal Shards was overloaded since it had high damage, instant cast, stun, reduced cost. And to me, they've made that statement of, we want to remove high damaging stuns in the game. It's like, okay, well then why did you nerf Shards? Shards didn't have high damage. It randomly stunned someone in the AoE that it dropped in, and was used as a Templar delayed stuns for their burst. It made sense because you could block it, you could see it being cast, dropped, and you had to work around it. It allowed the Templar to set up some cool combos, it allowed the Templars some interactive gameplay with the opponents. Now their only stun is what? Toppling Charge. And then they're like, oh, now if the sorcerer wants a stun, they have to go either through a cast time or deal reduced damage. No one went for the cast time, let's be real. Cast times in a game that are fast paced are not gonna, they're never gonna be used. We can get bashed, our ward goes down, we take too much damage during the cast time. The cast time messes up our burst rotation on Curse, because we don't get to weave in as many abilities, or set up and prepare for it. And then they buffed Rune Prison. This is where we got the OP Rune Prison, and this is the start of the year where they nerfed and buffed it every other patch. The thing with stuns is, Rune Prison may not have had insane damage, right? But Rune Prison was still more broken than Frag was. And they're saying Frag was overloaded. We had a chance to proc it, like, here's the counter argument for Frags. We had high damage, but it could also be reflected with wings. It could be absorbed with shimmering. It could be reflected with absorb magicka or the reflect sword and board skill. Rolled, shuffled, blocked. Like, there were so many things and so many ways to deal with frag. You could see the purple glow. You could see the cast time in the air. Like, you could see all these things. There were clear telegraphed things that in counterplay to the ability, and then they release Rune Prison, which is just a nope, you're getting stunned. You can't see it coming, you can roll, you can cloak, you can block, it's still hitting you. Now that's mindless. That's overloaded. That's putting a fear on steroids, because now at max range I can force you to your knees in a clunky stun, and I can hit you with anything I want. Meteors were being dropped in those combos, curses. Like instead of, Meteor has a clear indication that it's getting dropped on you. It has a clear counter, which is blocking it. And when they remove that, because it's a high hitting skill, and they're like, they remove that counterplay. You can't block it anymore because Rune Prison's gonna drop you. You can't roll because Rune Prison's gonna catch you, or Meteor's now gonna stun you. It removed any counterplay. It made Sorc so one-dimensional and boring in duels, and Sorc v Sorc was lame because Sorc would just, once again, you're complaining about wards, but this makes Sorc stack and play more defensively until they get their Meteor now. They're just gonna hard cast wards, light attack, get their fucking Meteor up, and then they're gonna rinse repeat that combo until they kill you. And it's a mindless combo. If you make a mistake on your end, you don't even have to make a mistake. They can kill you with it. It's not interactive, it's not skillful, and it's clearly more broken than the frags was with the stun. If you need any more like information or evidence that it's broken, go ahead and comment below and let me know, and I'll talk about it, and I'll provide clips, so I'll discuss it with you if you want. But I feel like this is something where they don't understand the impact of some stuns like this. It makes sense on a DK, right? They have to be in melee range. They are a predominantly melee range class. So Fossilize dropping you to your knees and stunning you and opening you up for a Meteor or a Leap or their whip and proccing their Flame Lash, it makes sense. There's counterplay to it. You block when you get up and you stop their Flame Lash. They're coming up close. They have an ultimate up. You're off a CC. You stun them back. It was still a give and take, and it was interactive with a DK, and they don't have an execute, so their burst has to one-shot you without an execute. So you still have leeway. But on a Sorc, I Rune Prison you, I combo you, and Fury instantly procs before you can even break it. It's not a good change. And they clearly saw that, and they made tweaks every patch to try and fix that mistake. If you look at Shulk and Shards and Crystal Frag, they removed the stuns on these 3 Magicka class skills, and they said they were overloaded and overpowered because of the stuns on high damaging abilities. Well, one, Shulk was hitting pretty decently. I would say it does hit hard, but in an outnumbered situation, because they said they don't balance around 1v1s or duels or whatnot. There's no way they do. Shulk would randomly stun someone. You don't get a pick. You can block it. You can move out of their front range of it. You can move behind them. You can move through them. You can roll to get out of its line. You can stun them in return. There's so many interactive counters to these stuns that they nerf, and then they put out stuns that have no counterplay. It just does not make sense. Or they don't give those classes anything in return. For the longest time, Megden didn't have a stun given back to them until recently in Murkmire. And it's still like they took crystal fragments from Sorcs and they put it on this ice chunk that you now toss for Megden. They really are, in my opinion, they're stubborn and they don't want to go back on changes that were poor for the game. And if an employee or Zos or Robo or anyone has the reasoning or the backing to support why those things should be removed, I want them to say something, because in my opinion those nerfs should never have taken place. All 3 of these stuns had numerous ways to counter them, and some of them didn't even do enough damage. Anyways, let's keep moving. Dragon Bones, not many changes. There's just visuals and updates. We get to Somerset. Empower now only buffs light attacks. It's another damage nerf to us, because we could empower our frags or our curse. I actually don't think you can empower curse. Never mind. Blood Magic, increasing healing done when this ability procs to 5 to 10% of your max health from 4 to 8, so 2% increased. The issue with this is we don't have many good ways to proc Blood Magic. This is a nice change to the Daedric Mines, but once again, what is this? May 2018? When did the Morrowind change happen? June 2017, and before that, we had a couple sustain changes. So a year later, they bring our mines down to what it should have been with like pre-Morrowind, right? We're not. This isn't really a buff. This is a pre-Morrowind sustain fix. Oh, this is what it used to cost. We'll just give it back to you a year later. And now you have to try and fit this on your bars again, right? Overload, sure, makes sense. You can put it on overload. Drop harness, I guess. Drop surge for a spell power buff. Run mines. You have ways to do it, but a lot of our abilities are one-dimensional, like one purpose, and we don't have the bar space to do it. We need overload for it. Blood magic, though, we don't have many good ways to proc this, and 2% more isn't going to make a difference for us when 10% of our max health is going to be at most like 2,000, because we're only at 20k to 22k health. And what, like a couple skills are proccing blood magic, and not very frequently and not reliably. So I feel like in Somerset they knew that they wanted to nerf wards, and in fact I think they knew they wanted to nerf wards for quite a while, but they haven't given us enough yet to justify nerfing wards. We still have very shaky healing. Like, pet's not really reliable, takes up 2 bar spots, it can be easily killed. Now that the ward can't be casted over it as consistently, it's more prone to die. You know, we need something. I feel like, anyways, I'll talk more about that later. Negate magic, increase the duration, doesn't, like 2 more seconds, okay. This was to make up for a passive that was changed or whatever. So it's just a compensation. Cost your next magic or stamina ability used after you block. I guess it's a sustain buff. So you can block and then ward. Once again, they're trying to help our sustain. But once it, like, so if we start over real quick, not even just starting over, but if we go to the top, look how long they spend giving us sustain buffs. For the first like 3-4 patches here, they spend so much time on like reducing cost of skills, giving us more sustain on Dark Deal and passives, and then we get hit Morrowind and they take all of that away. They strip our sustain and they take all of that away. I remember when you used to be able to run Seducer, Engine Guardian, Willpower, and you could sustain, you could still do decent damage if you lined up your combos. Now you can't even get away with running, you can barely get away with running 2 sustain sets. So then once again, you know, a little small change to this, my Gear Vitality buff. Sorcs really can't take like advantage of this skill very well. You can run it in group, but at that point you're better off being a Sorc, because Sorc has HOTS, they're faster, they're more mobile, they have access to major expedition easier, and they can get away with running. It moves speeds. Sorcs do squishy, you know, they have to ward. They're single target predominantly. If you want to negate Encase Monkey, you run Sorc with like 40k health. Major Vitality is a good change for Sorcs and groups that are playing that way for group play. And it's not really worth slotting on a Sorc just to get that Vitality, especially in this recent patch. So it's like, once again, they're giving us another heal, because I think they know that they want to nerf wards. But, you know, now that the BR Resto's coming out, we're going to run that instead of this. Rune Cage, you know, they go back and forth between nerfing it and buffing it, between the stun time, the damage, and if it's on the front or back, and how much damage it does. They spend an entire year, I kid you not, going back and forth every patch, nerf the stun duration, you know, from between 5 and 2.5 seconds. Nerf the damage, put the damage on the front, put the damage on the back, you know, and then later eventually they remove it, so you can't stun through block, you can't stun through roll. So then they just like gut it, and they take everything that they gave to it, and they remove it, and now they're nerfing it again and making it so it has a delay of 1.2 seconds, and it puts a clear cage around the enemy so they can see that it's going to be casted on them. It's already really unreliable this patch because people can dodge it without even trying. It's really washy. It doesn't help set up our combo. It takes a second to cast it between our combo just to set it up for a curse. It's clunky, let's just say that, because the beauty of frag combo is you could toss frag knowing that your stun was going with one of your damage abilities. So you could weave, toss frag, and then you had to have time to do one other thing. Now it's like, okay, I curse, I shock, I light weave, I toss frag, or I rune cage first and then do the other one, vice versa, depending on your range. Alright, so then they buff bound armor. You know, allows you to block and emit damage for 3 seconds, and they, you know, 1 bar, etc., trying to give us some space. But you just lose magic on the other bar now, and you'll double slot it if you want the magic on it, 1 bar or the other. And for people putting wards on front bar, this works out pretty good. It's an interesting change. I wouldn't say it's bad. It's good, but it's not like something insane that we really needed. Can it be used? Yes. Can we still use it? And probably going to use it, maybe. Conjured ward increases strength. Actually, they didn't really do anything here. They just made it so the base did 10% more, so that the other morph of Harden gave you a bigger ward. There's really nothing changed here, and they said that. Wolf Hunter comes around. Rune Prison, increase the duration of stun applied by this ability and its morphs. Once again, changing Rune Prison every patch because they don't know what to do with it, because people told them on forums for a year that it was a bad skill. It just brought Sorc more heat, unnecessary attention and heat on a highly nerfed class in the past 2 years already. Like, if you look at the buffs that we've gotten in the nerfs, we've had impactful nerfs and very minimal buffs. We've had sustained buffs and tweaks, but then it was stripped away with Morrowind. We've had small, like, Encase buff, you know, Aegis buff, you know, your AoE frag stun buff, like skills that we're not using, skills that we're not able to utilize well. And then they don't give us anything in return for these hard-hitting nerfs with ward, streak, surge, frag. All of our main core identity skills are getting huge nerfs, and nothing's being done in return in the past 3 years. This is why I'm saying it's outdated. You know, they plan to have more changes in the future. Like, they just don't know what they want to do with Rune Prison. It can now be dodged, you know, change the stun duration, decrease the damage, it only deals damage. Like, they just don't know where to put all this stuff. They don't know how to make it work, and it's because it doesn't work on a Sorc. This should never have been changed. Rune Prison should have been left how it was. Should have put in the streak through block and roll on streak, and made us make a decision: get up close or stay at range. You know. And then this is where they messed up Fury and why it's missing so often. And they fixed it here from Somerset or whatever. It was an issue with dodging this ability, and its morph would still apply. Execute explosion debuff to you, but now it hits you and it procs, and then it has to proc again and hit the explosion, and it just double dodging. It's really not unreliable, and if you don't believe me, that's fine. I'm sure Sorcs can come in here and provide clips or tell you. I know Veda tested it in PTS and it was missing all the time for him. Anyways, Dark Exchange, now restore. So now, you know, like I said, you know, they had buffs over Dark Exchange over 2 or 3 patches. They take it all away at Murkmire. So now we get half of the sustain back initially, and then the rest is given us to over 20 seconds. 20 seconds is a really long time to get those resources that we could have just had up front. And then they increase the net worth by 2%, just 2%. Like, okay, if you think about it and you put it in perspective, over 20 seconds, what, net is 20 some seconds, you know, Siphon's 20 seconds. But those abilities are giving us 600, 450, half, a little more than half than what all these other classes are getting. And we used to just be able to get it up front, and we still had sustain issues. So if you can get it all up front, if I can get 4,000 Magicka and 4,000 Stamina, or one or the other, all up front, or I can get half of that and the remainder in 2% increase net worth over 20 seconds. What do you want? Do you want $5,000 right now today in your hand, or do you want, I mean not 5,000, 2,550, you know, some like a small 2% increase, whatever that would have been. I'm just ballparking here. Like, because you're barely getting, what I'm trying to say is you're barely getting anything more over 20 seconds. So over 20 years, do you want, or you know, 20 days even, do you want that remainder amount with the 2%? Or would you rather just have all 5,000 now? Like, you don't know what's going to happen in 20 days. You don't know what's going to happen in 20 seconds. You might be fucking dead. That might not, you might have needed those resources right now, and you didn't get them. So what they're trying to do here is, and they're justifying it by saying, well, you cast it ahead of time. So now it adds to your sustain for the future. Alright, so I could do that, and I could cast it like a cast and forget, and then 20 seconds later I'll cast it again. But that sustain increase isn't really doing much for me. I could just be vampire. You know, I could just run a different enchant. I could run the absorb glyph on my bar. I'd rather have Dark Exchange on command and cast that 1.5, you know, second time than wait. So now you nerfed all the sustain that you were giving Dark Exchange. You didn't change the sustain issue that Sorcs had. And every patch you've made our sustainability harder with the changes and the nerfs and the increase to cost. And you can be like, oh, well, they gave you Daedric mines. They reduced that cost. They didn't really reduce that. It already costed that. They're just undoing a nerf that they did to one specific skill because of Morrowind. And another change I didn't like with Dark Exchange is that they made it unbashable. In my opinion, Dark Exchange should have stayed bashable because it allowed people to interact with the Sorc who is trying to just spam it for resources back and reset a fight. You should be able to get bashed for that. You streak away, you get LOS, something. You stun your enemy, you dark deal. And then they should have made it a more reward risk type thing and given you more resources back even though you can get bashed. Something like that would have been, once again, more strategic and interactive gameplay. And then once again they nerf Rune Prison. And then this is, I love this. This is why I underline this spoiler comment. We wanted to clearly telegraph when this stun is coming. Frag was clearly telegraphed. Frag had nothing wrong with it. If it had something wrong with it, you nerfed the damage. You nerfed Empower. You haven't given us any damage back on it. Next patch, Shuffle's gonna do 25% damage mid to our Curse, to our Meteor, to our DB. We lost a lot of damage, and we haven't been given any in return. Frag stun, you could see the purple glow. You could see it traveling to you. And you had multiple ways to block it and counter it. And then you have Rune Prison, which has none of those things. And now you're giving it something like, okay, well, we want to, you know, give you something to prepare your defenses. When you ruined a perfectly balanced stun that could have maybe taken a few tweaks. Frag is now hitting between 3 and 7k, like I said. Like, it's not hitting hard. It's the only people it hits hard against are the PvE players, or the people who are poorly optimized, lower CP, who are running out of 18k health. Nice, so you hit a 10 to 12k frag on them. People in heavy armor hit in 4k crits because of Impreg. Brass is now a thing, you know, like sets that weren't out when they made those nerfs to frag are now out, and they're not updating Sorc's kit because of it. You know, we have 300 more CP, that's more damage mitigation that you can put into it. More shattering blows for ward damage. And then they increase the, you know, the block mitigations, which is good. And ward cast time, you know, that everyone knows about that. And then critical and resistances and damage. And then overload, they nerfed it and can't give a third bar anymore. And this is like a double-edged sword. So with wards, 1 cast time, and overload not giving us a third bar, we need more options for defenses than ward, right? We can't rely on ward. We need rapid regen. We need something like boundless. We need to run surge for the heal. maybe mines. But with limited bar space now, because we don't get the third toggle, we're really stretched thin. And what I feel like what they did with Overload is like, it's no longer an ultimate. Right, you can toggle into Overload, and your light attacks now weave is the shocks. But you don't gain ultimate. The light attack damage is nerfed by 50%. So it's still maybe doing 5 to 7k to people. It's good at like nerf the gank or whatever. But it's pretty easy to dodge. Even if you have someone tab targeted, it can fizzle out because it's not in range. You don't gain ultimate. You don't get the third bar. I honestly feel like Overload just needs to be reworked as an ultimate. Give us something like you shoot an ultimate at someone for 120 ult, and it goes to the target. Kind of like a meteor. You tap target them, you toss Overload. It is like a beam, not even a beam, it just tosses a fucking shock orb. And it can be blocked, but it can't be rolled, it can't be, you know, evaded or whatever. So Sorcs could set up a stun combo, toss Overload, etc, etc, or even make Overload like a variant of Magicka DB Concuss. You know, something. Overload just needs to be reworked at this point. Like, you know, cool, you can weave it, and you can run the one that gives you Magicka back to help your sustain, so you're weaving lights that are returning Magicka, which is cool. It can work. But if you think about it, Sorc's not a sustained damage class, and maybe now they could be with Overload, lights, and shock weaves, but we're still sitting on that cursed 3.5 second explosion for our burst. Maybe the Overload pressure is enough, maybe not. But we don't have any debuffs in our kit. We have not a single debuff. We don't have Breach, we don't have Defile, we don't have anything. We can concuss, but that's a chance to concuss. Anyways, spoiler, we want sorcerers to feel like they have access to their full arsenal. But we have so many skills, and a lot of them are toggled, and we still don't have enough bar space, and now we don't have access to our full arsenal. We can't get area denial with mines if we want to run boundless. We can't get an extra ward for sustain if we want, you know, surge. You know, Aegis isn't even put into a passive, so if we want 8% magic increase, we have to run it. Now that we have our stun on Flame Reach or Rune Prison, that takes up a bar space. We can't run Inner Light. We lose damage. There's so many things that we have to give to get anything, and now that we can be crit and resist damaged, we have to run something like Impreg or Brass, or I'm already running full Impen and, you know, like 1,000 into Impen CP. But that's still not going to be enough. It's a net loss and damage to your ward. You're still only at like 10k resistances, which can be easily stripped by classes with Fracture, 5k Fracture, and then a sharpened weapon is 2k. You know, then you have Spriggans, which is an indirect buff this patch. You have Shattering Blows damage. You have 3 to 5k CP pen. Like, all that resistances that you're going to add are going to be quickly removed, and it's not going to matter. This is a buff to heavy armor shields. So Igneous on a heavy armor class, or Barrier on heavy armor classes, or Healing Ward on heavy armor classes, etc. are going to be good, because they'll have like 30k resistances and maybe 3 to 4k Impen, depending on what they're wearing or what their group can provide for them. But Sorcs are really getting shafted here. And the Healing Ward no longer heals on cast. It has to wait the full duration to proc the heal. Which means, okay, so how do we get out of execute range? Right, we can run Rapid Regen, we can run Surge, and hope that we can get enough healing and get out of there. But now we're in this limbo where we're getting shafted by Shattering Blows, Oblivion damage, Night Slayer, Shield Breaker, Slodes from that aspect going through wards, and then we've got the CP gain by 300 since, you know, all these changes have happened. Now we have Major and Minor Defile to mess with. We have Soldier's Anguish set coming out. And now the healing that we need to run to be able to alleviate the ward nerf and to try and give us a new defense mechanism, which is still suboptimal, not being buffed, or we're not getting any like passive like increase, etc. Now we're gonna get screwed over by Defile too, right? So now we're getting double-edged sword here, and we're taking everything that everyone else is taking, but in a weaker defense mechanism. Like, if we have the ability to roll more because we have a larger stamina pool like stamina classes, that's straight up damage mitigation that we can't get. We can't block as much. We don't have HOTS rolling that are as strong. We don't have access to as well of Major Expeditioner, space, like creating space. On a SAM class, I can easily run around LOS and not take damage. In a Meg Sorc, I'm snared. I try and streak, I'm rooted facing an area. I might streak right into the fucking rock that I'm hugging. Streak is a short distance, the delay on it is clunky, the increase is just burning your resources, people can gap close to you, apply a 70% snare with Lotus spam or Stampede, or a ranged snare is coming onto you, you have the unique snares. It's just a huge burn on your sustain. You don't have really good way to mitigate damage and sustain your health now. You have a low health bar compared to other classes. Now you're forced to drop a sustain set like Shackle Breaker and run Impreg. So say you run Lich, Impreg, and then a 2-piece. A monster set like Bloodspawn or Infernal Guardian or Engine Guardian or something. Now where's your damage coming from? Before we could run Shackle and get, you know, the spell damage and 1k more Max Magicka, which is a little buff to our damage, but it still is more sustain based. And now we have to run something for mitigation and sustain. Whereas heavy armor classes, on my Stamden, I'm running two damage sets in heavy armor. I'm mitigating more damage. I have better sustain in my passives. Heavy attacks return more on 2Hs, which are also easier to get off. They weave better into my combos. My healing's better. My mitigation's better. My damage burst is better on an AoE spread. Like, this class at this point is just outdated, and we need a rework on pets, on Aegis, on our passives. Something for both Stam Sorc and Meg Sorc. We need a better heal option so we don't have to rely on wards, and then people don't get mad at wards. Alright, so moving on. Alright, so what I did here, just so quickly, and you can pause it whenever you want. I'm putting them side by side, the nerfs and the buffs, since Imperial City to Murkmire. So nerfs over here on the right, buffs on the left. So if you want to pause at any point and look at the buffs that we gained compared to the nerfs, you can do that. So scrolling down to the bottom and scrolling down to the bottom for the rest, and then going back up to the top and quickly going over it. Just like a quick, like 5-minute review. You can see the frag damage we gained was for the AoE morph. The wards was a cost reduction a little bit. Minor mending, which was then removed later. Rune cage back and forth for a year. Dark deal sustain gives. Negate changes. Aegis changes to damage mitigation. Encase changes, which are minor for, you know, the cost and the major vitality. A few passives for sustain or health sustain, which are very minimal. And then you have miscellaneous changes here with surge and mines, cost reduction, some damage, overload, giving more resources back, etc. So then if you go over here to the nerfs, frag, one huge nerf. We lost a stun and we lost 10% damage and we lost some power damage. That's a huge damage nerf, which if you look at the buffs, we didn't gain back anywhere. We didn't gain any damage here. If we go to ward, it's 20 seconds to 6 seconds and then a cast time, right? And what did we gain in response over on this the buff side? We didn't gain any healing. We gained 2% healing on a passive. We didn't gain any other defense mechanism other than Aegis that you could justifies like the damage made from blocking. But once again, we're Mag Sorc. We have like 10 to 14k stam. How long can you block? You don't have a sword on board. You don't have sturdy. You're gonna burn through your resources real quick there. Okay, then we go to Rune Prison, which is a nerf, which is explanatory in itself. It went back and forth, and all the buffs that they did to it are now gutted and gone. Dark Deal. All the sustain that we got in buffs is now gone. Because it's given it to us over 20 seconds as opposed to upfront. Streak. We lost 4 seconds on absorbed projectiles. We lost the freedom and the fluidity of just being able to streak out and gain distance and space as a defense mechanism. We have the increased cost. We have the delay added. We lost the block. What did we gain over here to compensate for mobility and positioning? Arguably the cost reduction of mines, but not really, because that was nerfed in Morrowind. We never would have had to have that cost reduction change if we didn't lose that sustain in Morrowind. Where did we gain sustain in the miscellaneous changes here from light armor and CP changes? We didn't gain anything over here and sustain buffs after that. We didn't gain anything. There were no passives or skills buffed to give us sustain back. We have heavy restos, which can now be blocked. You can block heavies to stop the sustain return. Surge, we no longer get the heal and the percentage of the heal back. What did we get in return for the healing that we lost? Nothing. So if you look at these huge changes on big skills, Dark Deal, Frag, Ward, Streak, those are main core abilities of a Sorc, and we got nothing back in return. We had minor changes to our Atro, to our Negate, to our Encase, to our Aegis, to random extra skills. Boundless stayed the same for 3 years, never got changed. A buff that we got, which is indirect, was the Destro Resta counting as 4 and 5 piece. Mage's Fury, they fixed the execute explosion thing. And weapon abilities can now be used in overload mode. I guess it's like a small little change, but it really doesn't matter in the long scheme of things. So if we look at these buffs and these nerfs, we got hit really hard over the past 3 years. We didn't really gain much in return, and what we lost in those 3 years was other classes were getting buffed. Other sets were coming out. Poisons were coming out. Monster sets were coming out. New skills were coming out. A new class came out. Snares became more prevalent. Defile and bleeds became more prevalent. And now we're sitting in a meta where bleeds and defile are really strong, and now our shields can get crit on by each of those bleeds. Resistances are ignored by bleeds. Our ward's going to be taken off and stripped by those skills really quickly. Any heals that we have underlying our ward are going to get mitigated and reduced by the defile. You know, shattering blows, and we've gained 300 CP from the Imperial City to now. And we've got nothing in return. This is why, and if this isn't enough to tell you why our class is outdated, I'm going to go over alternatives to changes on these main skills that could be made. And then I'll go over alternatives. Alright, look at all the buffs that Wardens have. You know, just real quick. You can pause this, you can look at it at any point. Sorcerer's Major Berserk is 2 allies who synergize the Atro. And we have Major Vitality or something in here from Encase. I don't think that's in here. But we have no debuffs. None. Not even Reach on our Frag, which could be added. You know. And then you look at Templar debuffs. Look at buffs that Nightblades give. You look at debuffs that they have. Like, our class is so minimalistic and outdated, and compared to all these other classes, for sustain, for damage buffs, for group buffs, for debuffs to enemies, the only way we kill people because we don't have debuffs is through that curse burst. And our damage is mitigated now from 25% damage mit, from frag nerfs, from empower nerfs, from set nerfs, from having to spec more into defensive. And no one's looking at that. Like, no one's giving us buffs in the past 3 years to mitigate the loss of not only our nerfs to our class, but then also the buffs and the changes to the meta in the game around us. Alright, and then real quick, alternatives. So like Nightblades have alternatives to wards, right? They have Shade, they have Cloak, Mirage 25% damage, they have Maim, they have Snares, they have Slows, they have Hots through various skills, they have increased healing through the passive, DKs, they have Major Mending, they have Coag and HP recovery bonuses, 12% healing increase, they have Wings for damage mitigation and snare removal, Inhale, Cauterize, Ember, Hots from Stamina Clubs, like Vigor and Rally, Templars, Breath of Life, etc. You can read these. Wardens, minor protection, their minor toughness, debuff removal, tons of hots in their kit. So then you can argue that the debuffs of these classes can also put into their enemy also acts as damage mitt, right? So the debuffs that Wardens and Templars and DKs and Nightblades have can act as damage mitt or pressure relief. Because the Defile means that the enemy's not hitting as much. They have to struggle with healing and sustain. So they can't just bang on me like they can just bang on a Sorc. And Sorc has downtime to the curse damage, so it's more time for the enemy to keep hitting them. Fracture allows more damage and puts people on the defensive. Instead, we lost our frag damage. RC is no longer able to do what it used to do. Like, it just got gutted. Fury is a double chance to be dodged. I believe that just fixed. Hopefully, whatever. We don't have nearly as many debuffs to apply to enemies, and our mitigation falls short on resistance buff, ward, pet heal, surge cap heal, or area denial space with Minds and Streak. So my alternatives, and you can read these, you can pause these, whatever, you don't have to listen to me, but Streak. So I am suggesting that you return the through block stun. You remove the delay on Streak. You reduce the cost increase. And then why? Because now we have Accelerate, we have Major Expedition, we have Bow, we have Swift, we have unique snares, we have sets that give you increased speed. The Morrowind sustain nerfs, and nothing was given back to us in sustain buffs. We don't have snare removal. So if Sorc is allowed to streak like Ezrith was back in the day, we could use that as our damage mitigation. We could streak 3 times and then hard cast a ward for a second, which would be fine. Or streak 3 times and give us time to get our hots going with rapid regen, with surge, etc. and break distance and gain like some pressure relief. Which would also make sense as a ranged caster. As a ranged caster on Sorc, most of the time you're fighting in melee range because you can't move, you can't get away. And then ward. Maybe give us major minor on it. Minor protection. Harness, return 400 mag per piece of light armor. So it's only returning half of the cost of the skill if you're worried about wards being overpowered, right? Harness should give some magicka back, kind of like Shimmering, but it shouldn't give the full amount or more. And, do a major minor system for wards. Like I said earlier, Harden and Harness major, everything else minor. Because now we're getting it with all these, like it's a double whammy, right? We're getting hit by everything. That's my reasoning for these changes. Frag, give us a stun back, and and can like hand in hand with the streak through block. The frag stun, there's nothing wrong with it. We already have a damage nerf, so it's not a high hitting, low costing, overloaded skill. And if you're talking about overloaded skills, look at surprise attack. Spammable, low cost, disease, so it buffs perfectly well Stamina Blades kit. Applies fracture, and they can stun it from cloak. So that could be seen as an overloaded skill. Like, frag is at least a chance to proc, has counters to getting hit by it, and has no debuffs applied to it. Maybe give us a damage buff of 20% on it, And it doesn't have to be all of these. It can be one of these, it can be a couple of these. Give us major fracture on frag. We have these counters, which is why these should be justifiable, at least in this current meta. Surge, uncap the heal amount. Like, go back to giving us a percentage of the total crit that we hit. Uncap it so it's not every 1 second. Like, we already have very minimal ways to get those heals procced. This would probably be also a really good buff for Stamp Sorc, who in the current meta has to run 4 momentum or medium armor shuffle to get snare immunity. If they don't have that, they're kind of like sitting ducks. They have to constantly roll. They have to try and streak in place. With Surge giving them extra healing, kind of like a Warden has extra healing with Major Mending and Spores and Lotus, Stamp Sorcs would be a little more viable. They'd have better healings and like, but that would still be debuffed greatly by Defile if you think about it. So say I hit a 15k crit. Wow, 15k, like way out there. And say even if it was 50% of the heal or the damage would give me in a heal is 7k, and then you do modifiers. The debuff of Defile, at least 50%, because you can easily get it up with Befoul, is going to be dropping it to like 3.5 base, and then, you know, whatever else your modifiers are putting, you're probably going to get like a 3.8 heal. Like, that's strong, but it can also get minor Defile on top of it. You have bleeds going on people, you're outnumbered, and it's definitely not going to be 50%. 50% is like a way out there number. If anything, it'll be 20 or 30% of the total crit, and the crit's not even going to be 15k, let's be real. At most, it's going to be like a 10k crit. So 30% of 10k crit, a 3,000. And then you got your major Defile, right? So it's not like it's completely broken. During the time that Surge has changed, it made sense, because there wasn't much Defile, there wasn't Befoul, you know, there wasn't a bleed meta, there wasn't Master Dual Wield. Now, Surge heal doing that would be a lot better. So if it heals off the dots, you know, like their Hurricane and their Master Dual Wield skill, Rending, it would allow them to give more sustained heals, which would be less sustained issues on their stab bar. They won't have to vigor as much, they won't have to roll as much, you know, they won't have to block as much, and that would be a relief to their sustain. Dark Deal, I think it should be bashable, but no halved resource return. Just increase the resources that we get, or by slotting that skill, we get an increased boost to our sustain by like 5 to 10%. Overload, I think we should just rework the ultimate completely, or the third bar should come back. If neither of those are good options, I think that our skills in general need to be reworked, so that we're not stuck into running one skill for one specific thing, right? There are too many abilities in our class that are toggles that take up too much bar space, or just do one thing, like Aegis, giving us 8% Magicka, and, you know, some damage mid, I guess, for blocking. Curse, just for that 3.5 second explosion. Frag, just like a kind of a complimentary treat to send in with your burst. Like, it's still not even hitting that hard, but it doesn't do anything else. It doesn't apply to debuff, etc. Shock is just there to proc your frag. Like, and then change the curse, potentially pulse every second, you know, and make it so it procs blood passive. Pulse could only be like 2k damage, and then have that for Battle Spirit, and then, you know, or even just 2k damage after Battle Spirit, and then resistances and, you know, impen or whatever. It's gonna maybe hit for a mitigation, like minor, major, maim, etc, etc. It's probably gonna hit for like 1,000 damage, but it mainly just there to proc our blood passive and give us some sustainability on the healing before the explosion. So at 1 second, at 2 seconds, at 3 seconds, it pulses. Something. These are options, these are ideas. You can disagree with them, you can add in your own in the comments below. I'm just trying to give some alternatives that I believe would help bring this class back up to a viable playability in the current meta, because of the CP changes, the sets, other classes, sustain struggles, the sets that we're forced to run, and to give us some more versatility with the class, because right now we're really pigeonholed, and I'd like to see that change, because Sorc's a lot of fun. It used to be a lot of fun. Now it's just it's a burden. You know, it's not fun anymore. It's frustrating. It's not as viable. And, you know, people are gonna be like, oh, you finally had to play the game like everyone else. Let's be really real right now. No one, like, Stamden has gone under the radar, but that class can run double damage sets. It can have insane healing, insane damage mid, insane ult gen, and no one cares about that. Sorc puts up a ward and people go ballistic. So please give me your comments down below. Spread this video to your friends, forums, anything. Let's make some decent changes that we can introduce to ZOS. So hopefully in the next couple weeks they can tweak things. They can give us some buffs, some other alternatives if they are going to go through with this ward change. I'd really like to see something coming out with Sorc, so that way we're not constantly getting nerfed, we're not constantly becoming outdated, and we're not going to have a tough time trying to build and play the class next patch. Thanks guys for watching. It's a long video, but thanks for sticking through it. Have a nice day.
The subtle way she looked me in my eye. She said, baby, I am not afraid to die. Push me to the edge. All my
Sorc
are dead. Push me to the edge. All my are dead. Push me to the edge. All my are dead. Push me to the edge. Phantom, that's alright. Inside all white, like something you ride a sled. I like the way that she treat me, gon' leave you, won't leave me. I call it that Casanova. She said I'm insane, I might blow